My wife wanted an open marriage on our anniversary. Now she regrets everything. Shocking true story. Imagine this: you've been married for 7 years. You feel settled, maybe even a bit comfortable, like life is finally smooth sailing. Then, one evening, the person you've built this life with turns to you and says, "I think we should open our marriage." Just like that, everything you thought was stable starts to feel like it's slipping away. That's exactly what happened to Alex. For Alex, this wasn't just a question. It was a shock, a jolt that left him feeling like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. He thought he and Mia were solid, that the life they'd built together was rock solid. But that night, looking into her eyes, he saw something different, a look he hadn't seen before. There was restlessness in her, a kind of excitement he couldn't quite place, and it scared him. He realized this was something she'd been considering for a while. Mia wanted to explore to open up their relationship. Now, a little backstory here: Alex and Mia had been together for nearly a decade, married for 7 years. They weren't the couple constantly swept up in dramatic romance like in the movies. No, they were more real than that. Inside jokes, lazy weekends with coffee, those little routines they'd built together over the years, this was what Alex thought love was, a deep bond that felt like home. But things started to change when Mia landed a new job. She was thrilled, a fast-paced tech firm filled with young, energetic people. Suddenly Mia had new friends, people living what she called exciting lives. They were single, free, and adventurous, living each day with no strings attached. Mia was drawn to it, and at first Alex didn't mind. He was happy for her. She deserved some excitement, he thought. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice subtle changes. Mia started coming home later and later. Every time it was the same explanation: just out with the team, but something about it didn't feel right. She seemed less interested in their usual routines, like her mind was somewhere else. Then one evening she mentioned her manager, Chris. She spoke about him with a spark in her voice that Alex hadn't heard in a while. "He's so funny," she said. "And charismatic, just one of those people who lights up the room." And right there, Alex felt something he hadn't felt in years: jealousy. But he brushed it off, telling himself it was just a work friendship. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. And then, out of nowhere, Mia dropped the bomb. "I think we should try an open relationship." She told him it was about experiencing more in life, about finding excitement that might bring them closer in the end. Alex was stunned. This was the woman he trusted, the person he thought he knew inside and out, suggesting they let other people into their relationship. He wanted to say no, but there was a look in her eyes that stopped him. It was like she was already halfway out the door, and he felt powerless to stop her. He loved her, and maybe, just maybe, he thought they could get through this together. So reluctantly he agreed. Lighthearted note, because, really, what's marriage without a bit of who's dating who drama, right? The following weeks were surreal. Mia dove into the dating world headfirst, meeting people, going out almost every night. Alex watched, a mix of confusion and hope brewing inside him. He kept telling himself that it would settle down, that eventually she'd come back to him, and they'd go back to being Alex and Mia, but things only got more complicated. Mia grew closer to Chris, and Alex couldn't ignore the distance growing between them. Meanwhile, he tried putting himself out there too, going on a few dates, but nothing felt right. His heart was still with Mia. Yet the more Mia talked about her experiences, the more he felt like a stranger in his own marriage. It was like watching his life from a distance, seeing someone else live it. But he held on, convincing himself this was just a phase, something they'd get through together. Then one evening, everything changed. He met June. The proposal decision. So there he was, Alex, trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. Mia had asked him to open up their marriage. Just thinking about it felt surreal. How could the person he'd trusted so deeply suddenly want something so different from what they'd built together? He couldn't ignore the questions racing through his mind. What does this mean for us, he wondered. Is she unhappy? Am I not enough? It was a roller coaster of emotions, from hurt to confusion to fear. But as much as it stung, there was also a voice inside him, something desperate to understand. He loved her, after all. And love has a funny way of making you consider things you never thought you'd be able to. Over the next few days, Mia brought it up again. She explained her side, saying she wanted to experience new things, claiming it would keep their relationship fresh. Alex listened, but honestly he felt like he was in a dream he couldn't wake up from. How could bringing in other people make their relationship stronger? He tried to understand, tried to see it from her perspective, but it just didn't make sense. Yet he could see how much this meant to her, that restless energy in her eyes. She was serious about this, and he was starting to realize it was either going along with it, or risking losing her altogether. He didn't want to lose her. As much as it hurt, he agreed. Now, you'd think that was the hard part. But really that was just the beginning. When they decided to go through with it, They set rules together, boundaries that were supposed to protect their marriage. Things like we'll always be honest and nothing serious with anyone else. Simple enough on paper, right? But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that once they opened this door, there was no way to truly control what would happen. Still, he clung to those rules like a lifeline, hoping they'd keep things safe. And then Mia. She was excited. She started looking at dating apps, going out more, meeting people. Alex watched as she embraced this new freedom, and each time she mentioned a new friend or a night out, it was like a twist of the knife. But he kept his feelings to himself. He tried to play it cool, hoping it would get easier with time. After all, wasn't this what she needed to feel happy? But he didn't expect what came next. Out of everyone she could have chosen, Mia ended up starting something with Chris, her manager, the very guy she'd been talking about at dinner, the one who'd lit up her face with excitement. And Alex? He felt like he was living a nightmare he couldn't escape. Here he was, supposed to be in an open relationship with the woman he loved, but watching her connect with someone he couldn't help but feel threatened by. For weeks, Mia would come home after her dates with Chris. She'd talk about how he understood her in ways she hadn't felt in years. Each time, Alex would sit there, listening, nodding, trying not to let his true feelings show. But inside, it was tearing him apart. He couldn't stop wondering if this whole thing was a huge mistake. And then, one night, he got curious. If Mia was out there meeting people, maybe he could give it a try too. He told himself it was only fair. But it didn't feel right. Each date he went on felt off, like he was forcing himself to be someone he wasn't. Sitting across from strangers, making small talk, trying to pretend he was interested. It only made him miss Mia more. No matter what, she was still the one he wanted, and that realization made him feel even more alone. In the middle of all this, he began to see Mia change in ways he hadn't expected. She'd come home late, tired but thrilled from her dates, and Alex noticed how her laughter felt different, almost as if she was a different person around him now. It was subtle, but it was there, the way she spoke, her expressions, even the way she moved. It was like she was becoming someone he didn't fully recognize, and that terrified him. Finally, after a month of trying and failing to connect with anyone else, Alex sat down with Mia. He tried to tell her how he felt, how difficult it was to watch her with someone else. He asked if maybe this open relationship was a mistake, if they should consider stopping. But Mia brushed it off, reassuring him that it was just a phase and that everything would settle down. She told him that she still loved him, that he was still the most important person in her life. She said all the right things, but for Alex it wasn't enough. He felt like he was caught in a tug-of-war, holding on to the marriage he valued while watching Mia drift further away. And as hard as he tried to be okay with it, his heart was breaking a little more each day. But he kept going, hoping against hope that Mia would eventually see how much this was hurting him. And maybe, just maybe, they'd go back to the way things were. But deep down, he knew. He knew things had changed. There was no going back to the way things were. He just wasn't ready to face what that meant. Then, on one of those lonely nights when Mia was out, Alex found himself scrolling through his messages, looking at old pictures, memories of better times, and that's when he noticed a new message from someone named June. She was a quiet, kind woman he'd met briefly at a work function weeks ago, someone he hadn't thought twice about until that moment. They'd exchanged numbers in passing, and he'd forgotten all about it. But there was a simple message from her, saying, "Hey, I just thought I'd reach out. Hope you're doing well." At first he hesitated. Part of him felt like he shouldn't reply, like this was crossing a line. But something about June felt safe. She wasn't like the dates he'd forced himself to go on. She wasn't part of the mess his marriage had become.
"So?"
he replied. It was just a small conversation at first, a few casual texts. But somehow, it felt different. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt like he was connecting with someone who saw him, not just the person caught up in a painful relationship experiment. And from there, their conversation grew. Each text felt natural, easy. June had a warmth to her, a quiet kindness that made Alex feel at ease. He could tell she wasn't reaching out for anything complicated, just a friendly chat. But each message, each laugh they shared, began to chip away at the loneliness he'd been carrying. Mia was still out there with Chris, and Alex was still hurting. But now, with June, he started to feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Alex tried to be strong, to keep his emotions in check. He told himself he could handle it, that this was something he could learn to live with, but the truth was, each day felt harder than the one before. Every time Mia mentioned Chris, there was a flicker of excitement in her voice, a little spark he hadn't seen in a long time. And while he wanted to believe her when she said he was still the most important person in her life, it was hard to feel that way when he was alone on the couch, wondering what she was doing with someone else. One evening, after Mia had left for yet another date, he tried to distract himself. He picked up a book, watched some TV, even cleaned the apartment. But his mind kept drifting back to her and Chris. Images flashed through his mind, the kind that hurt to even think about, but he couldn't push them away. He felt this ache, this deep loneliness he couldn't ignore, and in that moment he realized how much had changed. Sitting there in the quiet, Alex started questioning everything. Why had he agreed to this? Why was he putting himself through this kind of pain? He loved Mia, yes, but at what cost? Was he losing himself in the process? These thoughts terrified him because they forced him to confront something he hadn't wanted to see, that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the life he wanted anymore. As Alex sat alone that evening, he kept coming back to the same question. Why was he doing this? Why was he allowing himself to be torn apart for the sake of a relationship that didn't feel like his anymore? He thought about the life he'd imagined for them, the plans they'd made, the future he believed in. And here he was, sitting alone. Mia was out living a life he couldn't recognize. And then, there was June. She was a light in the darkness he hadn't expected, someone who made him feel like he wasn't invisible, like he mattered. Their conversations were simple, light, yet there was something about her that felt solid, like an anchor in a storm. She didn't demand anything from him, didn't complicate things. She was just there. And in a way, that was everything he needed. As the days went by, Alex found himself looking forward to hearing from June. Each message, each small interaction, felt like a balm to his broken heart. He didn't know what it meant, or where it was going, but he knew one thing for sure: June was helping him see a part of himself he thought he'd lost. And that was something he wasn't ready to let go of. Alex's first steps into open dating. So here was Alex, stepping into a world he never thought he'd have to face, dating as a married man. The idea itself felt strange, almost like he was living someone else's life. But with Mia out on dates with Chris and exploring her freedom, he felt like he had to at least give it a shot. Maybe this was the only way to feel less alone. He downloaded a couple of dating apps, hesitating with every tap as he set up his profile. It felt bizarre, listing his hobbies and interests, choosing pictures. This was supposed to be his reality now, but it felt anything but real. As he filled out the About Me section, he couldn't help but wonder, who am I doing this for? Was he doing this to feel less left behind, or to prove to himself that he could actually go through with this open relationship? But once his profile was ready, messages started coming in, and while he wanted to feel excited, like Mia seemed to be, all he felt was this strange discomfort. The messages, the small talk, the endless introductions, it all felt forced. Each person was new, but none of them made him feel anything close to what he used to feel with Mia. His first date was with a woman named Laura. She was nice, friendly, and easy to talk to. They met at a small cafe, and she told him about her job, her recent travels, and her love of cooking. Alex did his best to stay present, to actually listen, but in the back of his mind he kept comparing everything to his life with Mia. Every laugh, every shared glance felt hollow, like he was just going through the motions. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. As Laura talked about her love for French films, he found himself nodding along, but all he could think about was Mia, where she was, what she was doing with Chris, and if she was having a better time than he was. The evening ended politely with a quick goodbye and a promise to keep in touch, but deep down Alex knew he wouldn't be reaching out to her again. The whole experience felt wrong. He was supposed to be exploring, meeting new people, but instead, he felt more alone than ever. In the days that followed, he tried a few more dates. There was a woman who worked in marketing, another who was studying to be a nurse, and one who shared his love for hiking. Each time he'd start with a flicker of hope, thinking, maybe this time will be different. But it never was. Each date ended with him feeling emptier, more disconnected from the person he used to be. He found himself dreading the whole process. The small talk, the introductions, the constant effort to connect, it was exhausting. No matter how many times he told himself he was just exploring like Mia, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was somehow betraying himself. One night, after yet another unsuccessful date, Alex sat alone, replaying everything in his mind. He thought about the man he used to be, the husband he thought he was, and now here he was, sitting alone, trying to find connection in strangers, while his wife was out building a new relationship with someone else. It felt like his entire life had flipped upside down, and he wasn't sure he could keep going this way. Then, as if fate had a sense of irony, his phone buzzed. It was a text from June. Just seeing her name brought a hint of calm he hadn't felt in weeks. She asked him how he was doing, a simple question, but somehow it made him feel seen, understood. He responded, and soon enough, they were chatting like old friends. June didn't expect anything from him, didn't ask him about dating or what he was exploring. She just wanted to talk, to be there, and that was enough. Over the next few days, Alex found himself gravitating toward June. Their conversations became a safe space for him, a way to escape the chaos of his marriage and the confusion he felt in his attempts at dating. Each message from her was like a small anchor, something to keep him grounded in the middle of a storm. But as he grew closer to June, a new feeling started to creep in: guilt. He wondered if he was somehow betraying Mia, even though she was the one who had pushed for an open relationship. After all, Mia was out there with Chris, building her own connection. Why did it feel so different for him? The next time he saw Mia, he tried to act normal, like everything was fine. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She was caught up in her new world with Chris, barely noticing the change in him. She talked about her latest night out, laughing about some joke Chris had made. Alex listened, nodding along, but deep down, he felt a distance growing between them, a gap that he wasn't sure they could ever close. As the days went by, Alex continued to meet new people, to explore as he and Mia had agreed. But it was becoming painfully clear that this wasn't for him. No matter how many dates he went on, he felt more disconnected from himself, more lost. And each time he texted June, each time they laughed over something simple, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He started questioning everything again. Was this open relationship really worth it? Was he holding on to something that no longer made sense? Every part of him wanted to cling to what he'd built with Mia, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward June, the way she made him feel like himself again. It was a feeling he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried. One evening after another empty date, he called June. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and for the first time in weeks, Alex felt like he could breathe. She didn't ask him to be anyone but himself. There was no pressure, no expectations. And that simplicity was something he'd been craving. But even as he found comfort with June, the guilt lingered. Part of him wondered if he was betraying Mia, if he was somehow failing in the commitment he'd made to their marriage. Yet he couldn't deny the truth. Being with June felt real, like he was finally connecting with someone who saw him for who he truly was. And in the quiet moments when he was alone, he started asking himself the hardest question of all: was he really happy in this marriage, or was he holding on to it out of fear? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing: June had become more than just a friend, more than just a comforting presence. She had shown him a side of himself he'd forgotten, a part that was alive, that wanted to feel truly seen and valued. And that was something he couldn't ignore. Mia's realization changed in attitude. It wasn't long before Mia started to notice something had changed with Alex. At first she brushed it off, thinking he was just going through a rough patch. But there were small things she couldn't ignore. Alex wasn't waiting up for her when she came home late from her dates with Chris. He wasn't as eager to spend time together. And sometimes he'd even leave his phone face down on the table, a small gesture, but one she hadn't seen before. She started to feel a hint of worry, a feeling she couldn't shake. One evening, as she was telling Alex about her latest night out with Chris, she noticed he wasn't fully listening. He nodded, smiled in all the right places, but his mind seemed far away. It was subtle, but she sensed a distance between them that hadn't been there before. And for the first time, Mia felt a flicker of discomfort, a hint that maybe this open relationship wasn't as simple as she'd thought. Mia tried to ignore the feeling, but it only grew stronger. When she saw Alex texting someone with a smile on his face, or when he'd suddenly be busy with plans, she started wondering who he was spending time with. She'd hoped he'd go out and meet people, of course. But something about this felt different, almost like he'd found someone who really mattered to him. And that realization sparked a feeling Mia hadn't felt in years: jealousy. One day, while they were having coffee, she couldn't resist asking him directly, "So, anyone special you're seeing these days?" Her tone was casual, but Alex could tell there was more behind her words. He hesitated, then shrugged, giving her a small smile. "I've met someone. Her name's June." The name hung in the air, and Mia felt an unexpected sting. She'd encouraged Alex to date, she'd wanted him to explore, but somehow, hearing the name of another woman, a real person in his life, made everything feel different. She forced a smile, nodding along, but inside she felt a pang of regret. She realized that this open relationship she'd pushed for was no longer an abstract concept. It was real, and it was changing the man she'd thought would always be there. Over the next few weeks, Mia's discomfort only grew. She tried to convince herself that it was just a passing phase, that Alex's connection with June would fade. But every time she saw him texting her, every time he came home smiling after spending time with her, Mia felt a tightening in her chest. She hadn't expected this feeling, hadn't anticipated the possibility that she might actually lose him. And so she started making an effort to win him back. She'd cook his favorite dinners, surprise him with small gestures she'd long neglected. She even started visiting him at work, bringing him coffee, asking him about his day. But the Alex she once knew seemed different. He appreciated her gestures, smiled and thanked her, but there was a distance in his eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. It was as if he was no longer fully hers. Mia didn't give up though. She tried even harder, finding excuses to spend time with him, planning weekend outings, even suggesting they take a trip together. She thought maybe if they just reconnected, they could find their way back to each other. But each time, Alex seemed hesitant, almost as if he was going through the motions for her sake. One evening, as they sat watching a movie together, Mia reached out to hold his hand. For a moment he held hers in return, but then he pulled away, giving her a small, apologetic smile. It was a simple gesture, but to Mia, it felt like a wall had gone up between them, a wall she couldn't break down. In a moment of vulnerability, she decided to confide in a friend from work, someone she trusted. She explained the situation, how she'd wanted an open relationship, how she thought it would strengthen their marriage. But now, watching Alex with someone else, she realized how deeply it was affecting her. Her friend listened, nodding sympathetically, then asked a question that struck Mia to her core. "Are you sure this is what you want? Or did you just think it was what you should want?" Mia sat with that question for days, replaying everything in her mind. She thought about Chris, about the thrill of something new, but also about how hollow it felt at times. Yes, he was exciting, charming, but was he truly what she wanted? And when she looked at Alex, at the man she'd built her life with, she felt a deep sense of regret. She realized she'd taken him for granted, that she'd pushed him into a situation he hadn't wanted. And now, she was watching him drift away. One night, unable to bear the weight of it any longer, Mia decided to open up to Alex. She sat him down, admitting that she was struggling, that she felt like they were losing each other. She told him about her regrets, how she felt uncertain, how she missed the way things used to be. But Alex's response wasn't what she expected. He looked at her with a calmness, a quiet understanding, and told her that he felt the same. He admitted that he, too, missed the simplicity of what they'd once shared, but that he couldn't ignore how much things had changed. "I think we both wanted something we didn't fully understand," he said softly. "And now, I don't know if we can go back." Mia's heart sank. She'd hoped for reassurance, for a promise that they could rebuild. But Alex's words left her feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She realized then that maybe she'd gone too far, that in her pursuit of freedom, she'd lost sight of what truly mattered. Desperate to fix things, Mia suggested they go to therapy together, to try and salvage what was left. Alex agreed, and over the next few weeks they started attending sessions. But as they unpacked everything, the open relationship, the new connections, the regrets, Mia felt a painful truth settling in. She was the one who had initiated this change, but now she was the one struggling the most to accept it. In one session, as they discussed the impact of their choices, Mia broke down. She admitted that she felt lost, that her connection with Chris was exciting but empty. She confessed that the thrill of freedom had faded, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. And as she spoke, Alex sat there, listening, understanding in a way that only he could. But he had his own confession. He told her about June, how she'd helped him rediscover parts of himself he'd buried. He admitted that he felt a connection with her that was genuine, something he hadn't expected. He didn't say it out loud, but Mia could see it in his eyes. She was losing him, and it hurt more than she'd ever anticipated. That night as they drove home from therapy, there was a silence between them that spoke volumes. Mia felt the weight of her choices, the reality of everything they'd been through. She realized that, in trying to find herself, she'd pushed Alex away, and now she was left with a question she couldn't answer. Was it too late to save their marriage? The downfall of Mia and Chris's relationship. For a while, Mia had convinced herself that Chris was everything she'd been missing. He was charming, attentive, and made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But as the weeks turned into months, Mia began to notice cracks in the picture-perfect image she'd built up around him. Little things at first, comments he'd make, the way he'd talk about other people, but soon, those cracks grew into something she couldn't ignore. One night they were out with a few of Chris's friends. As the evening went on, Chris seemed to become a different person, louder, more boastful, talking over her as he told stories she'd already heard. At one point, he even made a joke at her expense, something about how easygoing she was, and his friends laughed. Mia forced a smile, but inside she felt a sting of embarrassment. It was the first time she wondered if she truly knew him. That night stuck with her. She tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just having a bad day. But similar moments kept happening. Chris would make offhand remarks, little digs disguised as jokes, or go on about his work accomplishments as if nothing else mattered. And the more time she spent with him, the more she started to see a side of him she hadn't noticed before, a side that felt self-centered, dismissive. The thrill of their connection was fading, and in its place she started to feel an emptiness she couldn't shake. In one vulnerable moment, Mia brought up her concerns to Chris, trying to tell him how she felt. But he brushed it off, laughing it away, telling her she was overthinking things. "Come on, Mia," he said with a casual shrug. "You're too serious. Just enjoy the moment." His words left her feeling small, almost foolish for trying to bring up something real. She realized he didn't truly care about her feelings, he was just enjoying the excitement of the moment. After that conversation, something in Mia shifted. She started pulling back, noticing how little she truly knew about Chris beyond the surface. It became painfully clear that while she thought they shared a deep connection, their relationship was more about thrill than understanding. And with each passing day, Mia felt more like a spectator in her own life, watching herself drift further from everything that once mattered to her. One evening while out for dinner, she overheard Chris talking to one of his coworkers. He didn't know she could hear, but she caught enough to understand the gist of their conversation. He was bragging, boasting, really about how easily he'd won her over, laughing as if it were some game. Mia's stomach dropped. She felt like a fool, realizing that what had felt like a genuine connection was, to him, just another conquest. Sitting there listening to his words, Mia felt a wave of regret wash over her. She'd risked her marriage, the life she'd built with Alex, all for someone who didn't truly see her, didn't value her. And now, here she was, left with the painful truth that she'd been chasing something hollow. She felt used, discarded, and more alone than she'd ever felt. When she got home that night, she couldn't hide her emotions. Alex noticed her distress and asked if everything was okay, but she brushed him off, too ashamed to tell him the truth. She felt as if she'd been stripped of the confidence and freedom she thought she'd gained. Instead, she was left with a hollow feeling, a reminder of all the choices she'd made. In the days that followed, Mia found herself avoiding Chris. She stopped returning his messages as often, canceled plans, and tried to put some distance between them. She told herself it was just a break, that she needed time to think, but deep down she knew the truth. Her connection with Chris was over. She had been chasing a fantasy, something that wasn't real, and now she was left facing the reality of her choices. Her thoughts began drifting back to Alex, to the life they'd shared before everything had changed. She missed him in a way she hadn't anticipated, missed the comfort of their routine, the quiet moments they'd once shared. But every time she tried to reach out, to reconnect, she felt a wall between them, a distance that hadn't been there before. She realized that she was no longer the center of his world, and it terrified her. In a moment of desperation, Mia decided to open up to Alex. She told him everything, from her disappointment with Chris to her regrets about their open relationship. She admitted that she'd been wrong, that she'd pushed him into something he hadn't wanted. Her voice cracked as she confessed, "I thought I wanted this, but I was wrong. I didn't realize what I had until I started to lose it." Alex listened quietly, his face calm but unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge her, he just listened, a kindness she hadn't realized she'd missed. When she finished, she looked at him, hoping for some reassurance, some sign that they could go back to the way things were. But Alex simply nodded, giving her a small sad smile. "I understand," he said softly. "I think we both made choices we didn't fully understand." In that moment, Mia felt the weight of her actions. She had wanted freedom, excitement, something new, but in chasing those things, she'd lost the one person who truly cared for her. And now, sitting across from him, she realized it might be too late to fix what had been broken. In the weeks that followed, Mia tried her best to win Alex back. She put all her energy into their marriage, planning little surprises, reaching out to him, even suggesting they leave the past behind and start fresh. But each time, Alex responded with a gentle politeness, a kindness that was almost worse than anger. He was there, but he wasn't fully hers anymore. One evening, after another failed attempt to reconnect, Mia broke down. She confessed to Alex how much she regretted everything, how much she wished she could turn back time. She admitted that she'd been lost, that she'd mistaken freedom for happiness, and now she was paying the price. "I thought I needed something new," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But what I needed was right here all along." Alex sat quietly, his face reflecting a sadness that mirrored her own. He reached out, took her hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I know," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pain. "But things have changed, Mia. We're not the same people we were." And in that moment, Mia understood. She had opened a door she couldn't close, had set things in motion that couldn't be undone. As they sat together in the silence of their living room, Mia felt the weight of everything they'd lost. She knew she'd made mistakes, that she'd chased something that was never real. But the hardest part was knowing that in her search for freedom, she'd lost the one person who had always been there, the one person who'd truly seen her. And the realization hit her like a wave. She had risked it all for a fleeting thrill, and now she was left with nothing but regret. And as she looked into Alex's eyes, she saw that same regret mirrored back at her, a painful reminder of what could have been. Therapy, a new perspective for Alex and Mia. Alex and Mia had tried to rebuild on their own, but the weight of everything they'd been through was more than they could carry alone. So at Mia's insistence, they started therapy together. At first, Alex was hesitant, unsure of what it would change. But he agreed, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they could find some clarity. Their first session was tense, both of them sitting across from each other in a quiet room, each unsure of what to say. The therapist, a calm presence, encouraged them to be honest, to put everything on the table. And slowly, bit by bit, they began to open up. Mia was the first to speak. She admitted that she'd felt restless, that she'd wanted something new, but hadn't fully considered what she was risking. Her voice wavered as she confessed, "I thought I needed excitement, something different. I thought it would make me happy." She looked at Alex, her eyes filled with regret. "But I didn't think about what it would do to you. To us." Hearing her say it out loud brought a mix of emotions for Alex. Part of him felt validated, like his feelings were finally being acknowledged. But another part of him felt a lingering resentment, a sense that it was too little too late. He had spent months watching their marriage unravel, and now, sitting in therapy, he wasn't sure if her words could undo the damage. When it was Alex's turn, he took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I didn't want any of this," he said quietly. "I went along with it because I thought it would make you happy. But in the process, I lost myself, and I lost us." His words hung in the air, and Mia's expression softened. For the first time, she saw the depth of his pain, the weight he'd been carrying. The sessions continued, each one peeling back another layer of their relationship. They discussed everything: their open relationship, the people they'd met, the choices they'd made. Alex spoke about June, about how she'd helped him rediscover parts of himself he'd buried, and while it hurt Mia to hear, she listened, recognizing the role she'd played in pushing him away. At one point, the therapist asked them to consider why they'd started this journey in the first place. Mia hesitated, then admitted that she'd felt pressured by her friends by the idea that she was missing out on something. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her desire for an open relationship wasn't about Alex or even about freedom. It was about her own insecurities, her own fear that their marriage had become too predictable. Alex listened, processing her words. He understood now that her choices hadn't been about him, they'd been about her own struggle to find meaning. And as painful as it was, it helped him let go of some of the anger he'd been holding on to. One of the hardest sessions came when they discussed the future. The therapist asked them if they wanted to rebuild or if they felt their journey together was coming to an end. Alex was silent, lost in thought. He had loved Mia for so long, had built a life with her, but the idea of going back to how things were felt impossible. Mia, on the other hand, was desperate to make things work. She talked about all the memories they'd shared, the life they'd built, and how she couldn't imagine letting it all go. "I know I made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want to fix this. I want us to be whole again." The therapist nodded, acknowledging her desire to rebuild, but turned to Alex. "How do you feel, Alex? Do you see a future here?" The room fell silent as Alex struggled to find the words. He looked at Mia, seeing the woman he'd once adored, the person who'd been his whole world. But he also saw the distance between them, the years they'd spent drifting apart. "I don't know," he said finally. "I love you, Mia. I always will. But I'm not sure if we can go back to what we had." His honesty hit hard, and he could see the pain in Mia's eyes. But he knew he owed her the truth. The sessions continued, each one filled with moments of hope and heartbreak. They tried to rediscover what had once brought them together, revisiting old memories, sharing stories they'd long forgotten. There were times when they laughed, times when they felt a glimmer of the connection they'd once shared. But each time reality would creep back in, reminding them of everything that had changed. As the weeks passed, Alex started to feel a shift within himself. Therapy had helped him confront the pain, the anger, the regret. He realized that for all the mistakes they'd made, he didn't hate Mia. He was hurt, yes, but he still cared for her, still valued the life they'd built. But caring for someone wasn't the same as being able to move forward with them. One day, after a particularly emotional session, Alex and Mia sat in the car, neither of them speaking. Finally, Mia turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we'll ever be able to move past this?" Alex took a deep breath, considering her question. I think we've learned a lot," he said. "I think we've both grown, but maybe that growth has taken us in different directions." Mia's eyes filled with tears, and Alex reached out, taking her hand in his. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he felt a sense of peace, a sense that they'd both done everything they could to understand each other. As they continued therapy, they began discussing the idea of spending time apart, a trial separation to see where their paths would take them. It was a painful decision, but one they both felt was necessary. They agreed to take things slowly, to give each other the space they needed to heal, to grow. In the final session before their separation, the therapist asked them to share one thing they valued about each other, one memory they would hold on to. Mia went first, recounting the early days of their relationship, the adventures they'd had, the quiet moments that had made her feel alive. "You've always been my safe place," she said, her voice breaking. "And I'll always be grateful for that." Alex took a moment, then shared his own memory. He spoke about the way she'd made him feel seen, how she'd been there for him through the highs and lows. "You taught me what it means to love, to be vulnerable," he said softly. "And I'll always carry that with me." As they left the session, there was a sense of finality, a feeling that they'd come to the end of one chapter and were on the brink of another. They shared a quiet hug, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time they felt at peace. In the weeks that followed, Alex moved into a small apartment, giving them both the space they needed to reflect. Mia continued her own journey, working through the lessons therapy had revealed, trying to understand herself in a way she hadn't before. And Alex, while still holding on to memories of their life together, started to envision a new path, one that allowed him to rediscover himself, to find happiness on his own terms. He wasn't sure where his journey would lead, but he felt a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to move forward. A new chapter, Alex finds clarity and closure. After moving into his new apartment, Alex felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and uncertainty all at once. His life, once filled with routine and the familiarity of shared moments with Mia, now felt strangely quiet. For the first time in years he was truly alone, and while part of him feared it, another part felt free. The first few days were hard. Every corner of his apartment seemed to remind him of the life he'd left behind. Little things like cooking for one or waking up to silence made him question if he'd made the right choice. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to see this time alone as a chance to rediscover who he was beyond his marriage. One evening, Alex sat down with an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, he saw images of himself and Mia from years ago, back when everything had felt simple and full of promise. He saw their smiles, the way they'd looked at each other, and he felt a pang of nostalgia. But as he continued to look through the photos, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: a shift over the years. subtle but there. Their smiles had faded, replaced by a kind of forced happiness, a tension he hadn't recognized at the time. It was like looking at a version of himself he'd outgrown. This realization was both painful and freeing. For so long he'd been clinging to the idea of what they'd once had, but now he understood that he'd been holding on to a memory, not a reality. Their love had been real, but it had changed, and trying to go back to what they were felt impossible. In the weeks that followed, Alex started to embrace the quiet moments. He picked up old hobbies he'd abandoned over the years, hiking, painting, and even cooking new recipes he'd always wanted to try. Each activity felt like a small step toward reclaiming parts of himself he'd lost in the routine of marriage. And with each step he felt a little lighter, a little more like himself. During this time he kept in touch with June. She'd been a steady presence throughout everything, offering support without expecting anything in return. Their conversations felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that he could connect with someone without the weight of his past. They'd talk about everything: books, movies, life in general, and each time, he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. One day June invited him to an art exhibit in the city, and Alex, feeling ready to take a step forward, accepted. The exhibit was vibrant, filled with colors and textures that seemed to mirror the complexity of his own emotions. As they walked through the gallery, June shared her interpretations of the pieces, her voice filled with curiosity and excitement. Alex found himself drawn to her openness, her genuine love for life. She reminded him of the beauty and simplicity, the joy in small things. At one point they stopped in front of a painting of a lone tree standing strong in an open field. June looked at him and said, "It reminds me of you, you know, strong, steady, finding your place even in the middle of uncertainty." Her words touched him deeply, and for the first time he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond his marriage, a future where he could be happy again. After the exhibit, they walked through the city, talking about their hopes, their dreams, the paths they each wanted to follow. Alex found himself sharing parts of his life he hadn't spoken about in years, his voice unguarded, his heart open. With June there was no need to pretend, no need to hold back, and that realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. In the following weeks their friendship deepened. June became his confidant, his anchor, someone who truly understood him. They'd meet for coffee, go for hikes, even spend quiet evenings talking about life. And each time, Alex felt a little more alive, a little more ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. But even as he grew closer to June, there was a part of him that needed closure with Mia. He felt a lingering need to address their past, to find peace with the person he'd shared so much of his life with. One evening he reached out to her, suggesting they meet for coffee. When they met there was a palpable sense of finality in the air, an unspoken understanding that they were both standing on the edge of a new beginning. They talked about everything, about their memories, their regrets, the things they'd both learned. Mia admitted that she too had come to understand her own role in their unraveling, that she'd been chasing a version of happiness that had led her astray. "I thought I needed something new, something exciting," she said, her voice soft. "But now I realize I was just running away from myself." Alex nodded, understanding her words in a way he couldn't have before. "I think we both were," he replied. "We were so focused on what we thought we were missing that we lost sight of what we had." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their words sink in. And in that silence Alex felt a sense of peace, a release from the guilt and anger he'd been holding on to. He realized that he didn't need to hate Mia, didn't need to carry the burden of their past. They had loved each other deeply, but that love had run its course, and now it was time to let go. As they parted ways, Mia hugged him, whispering, "I hope you find the happiness you deserve." Alex smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. For the first time he felt free to move forward without the weight of his past holding him back. In the weeks that followed, Alex continued to build a new life for himself. He pursued his passions, reconnected with old friends, and allowed himself to imagine a future he could shape on his own terms. And through it all, June remained by his side, a steady presence, someone who understood him without judgment. One evening as they sat together watching the sunset, June looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about where life is taking you?" she asked. Alex smiled, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. "I don't know where I'm headed," he replied honestly. "But for the first time I'm okay with that. I'm just enjoying the journey." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned shades of orange and pink. In that moment Alex felt a quiet contentment, a feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if his path would lead him back to June or somewhere else entirely. But he knew one thing: he was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever life had in store. As he looked over at June, he realized he wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. He was ready to let go, to live for himself, and to find happiness on his own terms. And for the first time, Alex felt truly alive. Conclusion: Alex's journey forward. After months of soul-searching, healing and new beginnings, Alex finally found himself in a place of peace. His journey had been painful, marked by loss, regret, and the unexpected twists that life can bring. But as he looked back on everything that had happened, he realized something important: he'd made it through. He'd survived, and not only that, he'd grown. In his quiet apartment, Alex reflected on all the changes he'd faced. There was a time when he'd clung to his marriage with Mia, believing it was the foundation of his life. But as he'd learned, sometimes the things we hold onto most tightly are the very things we need to let go of to find our true selves. And now, with Mia's chapter behind him, he felt a strange but comforting emptiness, a blank page, ready for something new. In the weeks following his final meeting with Mia, Alex poured himself into his passions. He took up photography, something he'd always been interested in but had never pursued. On weekends he'd wake up early, driving out to capture the sunrise or find a hidden trail to photograph. Each photo felt like a small step toward building a new life, a life that was his own. One day, while out on one of his photography excursions, he captured a single, lone tree standing strong against the horizon, a powerful image that reminded him of his journey. Looking through the lens, he saw himself in that tree, resilient, standing tall, and ready to weather whatever came next. He realized that he was stronger than he'd ever given himself credit for. Through it all, June remained a steady presence in his life. Their connection had grown deeper over time, a friendship built on trust, understanding, and a sense of shared vulnerability. She was patient, never pushing him to define what they were, allowing him the space to heal and find his own path. With her, Alex felt a freedom he'd never known, a chance to simply be himself, without the weight of expectations. One evening, after spending the day hiking and capturing photos, Alex and June sat by a lake, watching the sun set over the water. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of beauty that made everything else feel small. Alex turned to June, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know where life is taking me," he said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of calm. "But for the first time, I think I'm okay with that." June smiled, her eyes soft and understanding. "You don't have to know," she replied. "Sometimes it's enough just to be open to whatever comes." In that moment, Alex felt a sense of clarity, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he needed to be. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if his path would lead him to a deeper relationship with June, or somewhere else entirely. But he knew one thing: he was ready to face whatever came next, ready to live a life that was truly his own. Over the months, Alex began to let go of the remnants of his past. He stopped looking at old photos, stopped replaying memories of his marriage, and instead focused on creating new ones. He filled his apartment with his own artwork, filling the walls with images of the places he'd explored, the moments he'd captured. His home, once a place that reminded him of what he'd lost, became a testament to what he was building, a life filled with meaning, one day at a time. He reconnected with friends he hadn't seen in years, people who knew him before his life had taken so many unexpected turns. They laughed about old memories, shared new dreams, and reminded him of the person he'd once been before everything had changed. Each moment felt like a step forward, a step toward the life he was creating for himself. One day, while out for coffee with a friend, they asked him, "Do you ever regret any of it? The choices, the heartbreak, the changes?" Alex thought about it, a small smile crossing his face. "I don't regret any of it," he replied. "It was painful, and there were days I didn't think I'd make it through. But each experience taught me something, showed me a part of myself I hadn't known before. And I think I needed that." He realized that his journey hadn't been about finding someone else or even rebuilding his marriage. It had been about finding himself, about understanding what he truly wanted and deserved. And as he sat there, surrounded by friends, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything he'd been through, even the hardest parts. In the months that followed, Alex and June's relationship continued to evolve slowly and naturally. They spent time together, exploring new places, sharing dreams, and simply enjoying each other's company. There was no rush, no pressure to define what they were. They were just two people, finding comfort and joy in each other's presence. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, Alex turned to June, a sense of peace settling over him. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" she asked, her eyes filled with warmth. "For being there, for being patient, for helping me see that there's more to life than what I thought I'd lost." June smiled, taking his hand in hers. "You've always had it in you, Alex. You just needed to believe it." In that moment, Alex realized that he was finally free from the pain, the regret, the fear of the unknown. He had let go of the past, embraced the present, and was ready to step into whatever the future held. As they watched the stars appear in the night sky, Alex felt a quiet joy, a feeling that he was exactly where he was meant to be. His journey had been filled with twists and turns, moments of heartbreak and healing. But through it all, he had found something precious: clarity, peace, and the strength to keep moving forward. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt truly alive. And as he looked at the path ahead, he knew he was ready to embrace whatever came next.